Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to your third tutorial for PSYC 201W. This is the second part of week 3's tutorial on APA formatting. So let's get started. So the goals of this tutorial, the basics, is to go over title page and the abstract and how to format those, how to format section headings, how to structure and write in-text citations and the rules around them, how to structure the reference list, and page numbers and the running head. And then we'll go a little bit into the particulars. We'll briefly cover APA language and style and what the preferences are there. We'll discuss how to report numbers in APA formatting and how to use quotes, or I should say how to not use quotes, and paraphrasing. And by the end, you should know how to format a paper in APA 7th edition for your research proposal and your final project. So Purdue's OWL is an amazing resource online for APA formatting, and this is definitely not the last time you'll hear me say this. Please refer to Purdue OWL's section on APA formatting as many times as you need while formatting your paper. There really is no good reason why you won't be able to employ really tight APA formatting after watching this tutorial video and perusing their website. I'm a graduate student, so I've used APA formatting for quite some time, and I still go back and check things when I'm handing in term papers. If, say, I'm citing a technical report and I haven't done that for a while, I go back and I recheck the guidelines just to make sure I'm doing it right. And especially because I learned APA when it was in its 6th edition, and now it's on to its 7th edition, and there are some changes. So if you have attended university classes before, about like 5 or so years ago, and you're coming back now, don't just think that you know everything about APA because you were probably using the 6th edition. So definitely get reacquainted with the 7th, even if you have used it before. It does have some changes. So the biggest concept that I think some undergraduate students who are new to university don't quite grasp at the start is that APA guidelines are really strict. It's not enough to do some things and not others, or think it's fine if you toggle around with the margins or just using a different font size if you think it looks prettier or you like it better, or just be loosey-goosey with the headers because, again, you think it looks better. Believe me, I have marked enough assignments that I know when you've changed things like font size, and I don't need to reopen your assignment in Word or anything to actually check. So yeah, consider yourself warned. I really strongly advise you to know the guidelines and adhere to them very, very strictly. Other than OWL, APA also has a style blog. It's not as comprehensive as Purdue OWL though, so I always send people there first. And then as a note, if you do plan to be in psychology for the long haul and maybe go on to graduate studies after, it is possibly a good idea to purchase the APA's publication manual, because everything that I'm saying in my presentation today is in there, and it's covered more comprehensively, and it's about $35 to $40 Canadian at the moment. So it might be a good idea if you're interested. So the basics: title page, reference page. You need both of those. Title page is its own page that we will see how to structure in just a second. 12-point Times New Roman font. You'll see the Times New Roman on the slide is in Times New Roman. That's what it looks like. And just as a note, 7th edition does not actually require Times New Roman, just in case anyone knows that and asks, hey, what about this? But it is a good habit to get into, so I would still recommend using it because there are only a couple fonts that APA does permit, and I know Times New Roman's one of them, so it's just a good habit to get into. You're going to know that you're always in the clear with that. 1-inch margins throughout, which is what is the default in Word, so you don't have to go in and change that unless you already have. Text is left justified, so that means it's not centered or right justified. It aligns on the left, double spaced throughout. Page numbers do start on the title page, and they always go in the top right. So they don't start on the abstract, or they don't start on the actual page of text. And the running head is in all caps. It's on every page. There's a little bit of change here from APA 6th edition, as you'll notice if you're familiar with that when we look at the example title page. And the running head is no more than 50 characters, including spaces. And it's often a shortened version. It can be the title if your title's short, but it's often a shortened version of the title because titles are often longer than 50 characters with spaces. So looking at the title page now, the key elements, this is just a random sample one I created, and the key elements of it are the title itself, your name, your SFU ID number, your institution or organization, which in this case will be Simon Fraser University, the page number 1 in the upper right-hand corner there, and the running head in the upper left-hand corner in all caps. There is no longer a need to put the actual words running head on the very first page. If you're familiar with APA 6th edition, you'll know what I'm talking about. That was required for that. But right now for APA 7th, all running heads can be the same. And in fact, they need to be the same on all pages of your report. So it looks like this on the title page. So getting a closer look here, for yours, of course, you would put your own name and your student ID, and you'd write that it's submitted to me instead of Dr. Tan, because I'll be the one receiving them and marking them. Just looking at the different components here, there's the running head right up at the left-hand corner. The one that I've put up is 49 characters, including spaces, so it's just under the limit. It's a shortened version of the title because CBT is not spelled out. It's shortened. It doesn't have the in it, and it is in Times New Roman. The page number, it's on the right-hand side. It starts with 1, and what I wanted to note here is that I see, and I've had to take marks off for this a lot before, people won't change the font of their running head and their title page to Times New Roman, or they won't change it to 12 point because the default is, I believe, Calibri and 11 point font in Microsoft Word. So please change that. They'll do their title page in 12 point Times New Roman. They'll do everything else right, but they'll not change the running head and the page number. And make sure to pay attention to detail and change that. For the title, you would capitalize every word that's longer than 4 letters. So I just don't, and the very first word, the, but I don't have of or on capitalized. There's my name, my fake student ID, and my affiliation. And then you put the class number as well, the class number in the class section. So of course that would differ, and I've put that I'm in D105, but if you're in D106, you'd put that, and who you're submitting it to. Now, looking at the abstract. An abstract is a 1-paragraph summary of your paper. It is on the 2nd page, and it is not on the same page as the title page. It's on its own page. It's a brief introduction to the topic. That's how it starts, no more than a sentence or 2. And then it contains a quick highlight of the methods, key results that you found, and it highlights key takeaways right at the end. Word limits for abstracts typically range from 150 to 250 words for published journal articles, but for this class, there is an 150 word maximum. I just wanted to highlight that. And again, it's on a separate page. It starts up at the top of the page, and they do include in-text citations. If you're saying something that is not your own work and it's been proposed by someone else in it, and abstracts must adhere to APA format just as the body of the paper will do. So that means that they're in 12 point Times New Roman, and they're double spaced as well. So you don't double space your paper and keep your abstract single spaced. Each portion of your abstract, and I don't want to say section here because it's just all one paragraph, there's no separate sections or headers. Each portion should be 1 to 2 sentences in length. So summary skills really come in handy here because it is very short. And as an example here, it's a sample abstract from another TA, Lee Vargan, who submitted or who formatted this as an example for this class. So thanks, Lee. You'll see the running head up there at the top left. It obviously doesn't match the actual content of the abstract, but it's still there at the top and it should be there for every single page of your paper. As said on the previous slide, you'll see that each portion of this abstract is either 1 to 2 sentences. The first couple sentences summarize your introduction, only noting the main issues. So basically, why is your study needed in 1 to 2 sentences? I know that's tricky, and it is really a skill that you need to build. Next, you sketch your methods out very briefly and then highlight your main findings. Lastly, you highlight the main implications of these findings. And one thing I would note for this abstract, generally, you don't want to write sentences like implications for undergraduate teaching are discussed. So that's only saying what you're going to do at the end of the paper and not what those implications actually are that are being discussed. So I would challenge the writer of this abstract to instead try and summarize what those implications for undergraduate teaching are. So for example, of course, it depends on what the hypothetical paper finds, but an example could be university-wide adoption of training in abstract writing for undergraduates may result in overall higher grades in classes that require term papers. So you actually are stating what the implications could be if you wrote that sentence. And it's 145 words, so it sticks to the limits for this class's abstracts. So moving on to section headings, this graphic clearly states the order that they go in. First, you'd use level 1 headings when you initially split your paper into the largest sections, and then you'd use level 2, etc., when you're splitting those main overarching sections into further subsections. Here's an example. You can see methods and results are centered. They are being level 1, the highest level. Then participants and materials are level 2 within the methods section. And then descriptive statistics are level 2 in the results section. Within the materials subsection, the Beck depression inventory and the Beck anxiety inventory are at level 3, so they are italicized. So this is what I meant when I said you can't just choose what style of headings you like the best. These sort of things are very structured in APA format. So you can't just say, I want my main headings to be italicized because I like how that looks and bolded. It's very specific when you center your headings, when they are left justified, and when they are bolded, and italicized, or one or the other. As you've probably guessed by now, your main overarching level 1 headings will almost always be your introduction, your methods, results, and discussion, especially when you're writing your final report for this class. All other subsections will be subheadings of these 4. So for example, you'll likely split your methods up into participants, procedure, and materials as subsections, which will all be at level 2, which is left justified instead of centered, bolded, but not italicized. It will be up to you if you want to split your introduction into subsections or your discussion into subsections. It'll just depend on the flow of your paper, but I, for one, recommend it. It'll depend what the content of those sections are, though, for how we are actually splitting them up. So going on to in-text citations, this is one of the backbone aspects of APA formatting. So anytime you reference the work or ideas of someone else, you must cite them in text and in your reference list. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. So be careful, don't do that. Prior research has found that specialized treatment resulted in small effects on reoffending, and then there's the in-text citation. Often when you're discuss it, or if you're saying the words like prior research or past research or existing literature has found, that means that you definitely will have to put one, if not more, in-text citations at the end of that sentence. So now let's review the nuts and bolts of this and how it's done in a few scenarios. And again, if you're wondering, if you don't see your specific scenario here that you're looking for, Purdue OWL probably has it. So definitely refer to that as well. So one author, Almond 2020, if you're citing a paper by me published last year, or if you are actually talking about the author in the text, you could say as discussed by Almond, and then you'd have just the 2020 in the brackets. So if you don't reference the or the author in your actual sentence, you would just put author last name, comma, year, or if you do say something like as discussed or as found by, you would just put the year in the brackets. Two authors, Smith and Jones, 1999, or Smith and Jones, 1999, found that. When in parentheses, you do separate the authors with a and sign, and if you're talking about the authors in mid-sentence, you use and. Of course, it's not appropriate to use symbols in the middle of an actual sentence in your report. Three or more authors, you would see something like Almond et al. 2004, or in the study by Almond et al. Or Almond and colleagues, they found that, ... But what if Almond, Smith, and Jones published more than one paper in 2004 with the same author order? Then it gets a bit confusing. So then we differentiate them as Almond et al. 2004A and Almond et al. 2004B. And then you also have to bring those A's and B's down into your actual reference section at the end of your paper too. But you only use the A and the B if it's the exact same group of authors in the exact same order. So that doesn't happen too often. It happens more when there is only one author that's very prolific and they're publishing a lot in the same year, but it does happen, and I have had to do it before. But what if Smith, Turner, Almond, and Ellison wrote a paper in 2015, and Smith, Jackson, and Wilson also wrote a paper in 2015? So the years are the same here, but the authors, Smith is the first author on both, which would mean saying Smith et al. 2015 would be very confusing. But the author order is different in this case. So we need to list as many author names as needed to differentiate the paper. So in this case, you'd say Smith, Turner et al. 2015 for the first paper, and Smith, Jackson et al. 2015 for the second. However, if for some reason it was Smith, Turner, Almond, and Ellison, and Smith, Turner, Jackson, and Wilson, you would have to say Smith, Turner, Almond et al., and Smith, Turner, Jackson et al. So I hope that's the general technique is clear for that. So using direct quotes, you would cite the page number as well as putting in the regular in-text citation. So if you say in your paper, upon reviewing the extant literature, Smith and Jones noted that the existing evidence for psychic phenomena was, in quotes, so weak as to be insignificant, you're already saying Smith and Jones, so that's up there. You don't have to put that in your parentheses, but you put the year in the parentheses, comma, and then the page number that you found it on. I often see undergraduates citing page numbers anytime they use an in-text citation just to be really safe, so it can't be plagiarism. But this is unnecessary and just makes everything clunky. So you only need to use page numbers when you're using direct quotes, and this should be rarely or never, and we'll talk about that later in the tutorial. If you're stringing together citations, and basically you're saying something in a sentence in your paper, but you have found support for that sentence in multiple existing research articles. You'd put them in all in parentheses together. Here you have Abel and Jackson 2004, and then a semicolon, Carlson et al. 1977, semicolon, and Marlowe 1901. And these should be in alphabetical order in the parentheses. That is of note too. So Abel's first, Carlson second. You don't organize them by chronological order by year. Organization as an author, American Psychiatric Association, and then to use that organization as the author, you don't put the actual people. And then the year as normal. Authors with the same name, you'd add a first initial if you needed. I've rarely seen that. I've never had to do that myself. Citing indirectly. So you don't want to do this. For example, if you've read something in the introduction of an article that is that article that you are reading, it cites, don't cite the article with the introduction that you're reading it in. You should go and check that in-text citation that the article has put there, that the authors have used, and then you go and you find the corresponding reference in their reference list and find the original article yourself and cite that original article. I hope that makes sense. So basically, if you found an article that you want to use in your literature review, but in their introduction they've cited something, you go and you find the thing that they've cited. You don't just cite the article that you're reading at that point. If you absolutely have to do this, even though you likely won't, you would do it this way. So Freud, 1901, as cited in Erickson, 2014, page 102, but always try and read and cite the primary source. Same authors, many articles. You sometimes slightly different than what we discussed on the previous slide. If the exact same author or group of articles in the same order have written multiple papers and you wish to cite multiple, you can write the names once and list the years after in ascending order. So what's different here is that it's the same article, it's the same author, but there are different years. So the years can differentiate them, no need to put A and B. But you would just put the multiple years and only put the author's names once. Okay. Going now to the reference section. Hopefully that last slide wasn't too confusing. A word of caution here first. There are electronic ways of automatically generating citations, as I showed you last week with PsycInfo, but these are not always correct. So Microsoft Word apparently has its own way of generating them. It's notoriously bad at this. So always check your references, no matter what generated them, no matter if you put them together, just double check them at the end before you submit, because it's a good practice to get into. You title your reference section references, not works cited or bibliography. I know this differs by formatting styles, but for APA, it's always references. Everything you cite in text needs an accompanying reference, and every reference should have a corresponding in-text citation. So don't inflate your reference section by putting in references that you don't actually cite in text, because that's really bad, and I will see it. And don't forget to not put something in, or don't forget to include something in the reference section that you cited in text just because you forgot that you cited it. Both of them need to reflect each other. And one reference per source, but often multiple in-text citations of the same source. So if you cite the same article, say 4 times in your paper, you don't need to put it 4 times in your reference section. However, you do need to keep citing it in text whenever you refer to it. Okay, so the basics, a standard APA reference for a published peer-reviewed journal article looks like what you see on the slide there. In generic terms, it is last name and then first initial or first initials, and then the year, title, and you don't italicize the title here unless it's not a journal article. You'll see different versions of this, but if it's just a regular published journal article, you italicize the journal publication, the volume number still in italics, and then the issue number not in italics, and then the page range. And then you put the digital object identifier if it's a newer article and it gives it, or often people call this the DOI. Of course, the last slide, they would all be in double-spaced formatting if they were actually in your reference pages, I should say that. And now this is from Purdue. For a book, you would title, or you would put the title in italics because there's no journal article name, or sorry, journal name. You'd still put the publisher name though, and that is not in italics for books, and then the DOI if available. For an example, if I wrote a book about training Bengal kittens, which I won't because I don't know what I'm doing, I actually need some help there, it would look something like that on the slide. My name, my initials, the year, the title in italics, and then the publisher. If it's a chapter in a book, you would put the author or authors, similarly to all APA references, the year. You'd put the title of the chapter, not in italics, somewhat similar to a journal article, and then you say in EE editor and FF editor, so the editor's names, eds in brackets, title of the work in italics, so that's the title of the actual book that the chapter is found in, and then the pages of the chapter, the publisher, and the DOI. So you can see that example on the slide there too. So a note about APA 7th edition, we can all groan at it because unlike APA 6th, they now expect us to write out the last name, the first initial of the first 20 authors. So that was different. It was actually shortened before. But if there are more than 20 authors on a single reference, you are able to shorten it. You add an ellipsis and you skip to the last name. So the first name, last name initial, and then ... and then the very last author. Their last name and first initial, and then the year, and then you cite it as normal. However, it's very likely you won't see a study or a book chapter with more than 20 authors. Psychology studies rarely have this many authors, and this is much more common in medicine and more hard sciences. Okay, don't forget the hanging indent. So you will lose points if you don't format your references properly, and this is really key to do. So just taking one of the examples of the references, you see that yellow arrow, that's the hanging indent. So if you don't know quite what I mean when I say that, that's an example of it. You see how my name, Almond, is way more to the left than the A Complete Handbook and the DOI. They're not aligned with the start of my name. So those two lines are pushed in, one indent. You do not indent the first line of the reference, but you indent all the lines following, no matter if there's just one more line or a couple more lines. It's another common mistake that I've seen in some undergraduate reference lists, to get this switched around and actually indent the first line and not indent the others. So don't do that. Be careful. It's the first line that is not indented. You, of course, alphabetize the reference list by the last name of each of the first authors, and you make sure it's double-spaced too. Okay, we'll quickly now cover a couple more things that are not obvious aspects of APA formatting, but are also expected when writing in it, and are things that the APA handbook discusses. So first, I don't see this too much anymore, but APA wants one space between sentences, not two spaces. This was actually one of the hardest things for me to learn back when I was starting university, because my mom taught me in high school to write with two spaces between each sentence. So I think this was popular and possibly necessary back in the typewriter era, and it kind of carried on a little bit farther. But right now we do need just one space between each sentence. Of course, if after a comma or anything else too, there is just one space. And second, commas. APA uses the Oxford or serial comma, which means that you place a comma after every item in a list. So you always place a comma right before the and. and then the last item of the list. So this is another thing I actually didn't know in practice until I entered the psychology department at SFU. So just for an example there, you can see you want, if you're listing dog, cat, mouse, and rabbit, you want the comma right after mouse too, even though a lot of people would not put that there. Semicolons. You would use them to separate two complete clauses that are related in theme. His contention was not that intellect was determined primarily by genetics, rather his view was much the opposite. So this could be written as two complete standalone clauses, but they're related. So if you're wondering whether you can use a semicolon, you need to make sure that both of the parts of your sentence you're trying to separate by the semicolon could stand alone as complete sentences. If they can't, then you can't use a semicolon. And semicolons can really come in handy when trying to summarize multiple ideas in a very succinct fashion in places like abstracts. For quotations, you use the double quotation marks, which just means that those are the typical quotation marks that you usually see people use, the two little dashes, not just one, and punctuation goes inside the quotations. You don't put a period after them. See the example on the slide. Parentheses. You don't want to nest them. So if you have to put parentheses within parentheses, you would use square brackets for the second parenthetical portion of the sentence there. So you don't use parentheses or brackets within brackets, as you can see there on the bad example on the slide. For abbreviations, psychologists love their abbreviations, but we should use them sparingly as they can get confusing to readers that are unfamiliar with the topic. A good rule of thumb here is to only abbreviate a term or phrase if you plan on using it over 3 times in a paper. Otherwise, if you use it 3 or less, it's just easier to write it out. If you're putting any abbreviations in a table, there needs to be a note at the bottom explaining them, and many journal articles include these notes at the bottom of their tables. So I'm not going to talk about it explicitly here, but if you're looking for guidance on how to format that properly, you can look for those examples in journal articles, and we can also talk about it more in the tutorial that we'll have later on making tables and figures. And commonly, tests, measures, or theories or models, diagnoses, and organizations will be abbreviated if you discuss them a lot. So for an example, if you're using an established self-report measure like the Beck Depression Inventory for the purposes of your research project, or focusing on a commonly known diagnosis or disorder like borderline personality disorder, I would recommend abbreviating it, as you'll talk about it a lot. So the main rule of thumb here is that the first time that you use the term, you write it out, you put brackets, you put the abbreviation, and then you can use the abbreviation for all subsequent times you refer to it. So there are also guidelines for reporting numbers in APA format. You use actual numbers to express any values 10 or above, any numbers included in the abstract, often when you're discussing your results or like number of participants, numbers with a unit of measurement attached, numbers that represent percentages, fractions, decimals, etc. So you would use a number even if it was, say, you were talking about a percentage like 6%, which is below 10 numerically, but it's a percentage. And you'd also use numbers when you're talking about numbers that denote a specific place in a series. So if you're referencing table 1 in your paper in text, you would write out 1, or you would not write out 1, you'd use the number 1, you wouldn't write out 1. Then you'd use text or written out numbers, words, to express numbers less than 10. So for example, 2, 7, you'd write them out. Numbers that begin a sentence, title, or heading. So For the example there, 15% of respondents approved of the initiative. If you're putting that in your title and starting with your title there with 15%, then you would write that out. This means you should reword sentences that could start with a number to not start with that number. And if you absolutely cannot rewrite them, you write the number out instead. So like I said, 15% of respondents. For writing style, you want to write in an active voice for the majority of your research paper. So in an active voice, the subject of the sentence names the actor. So the kitten attacked the cardboard box with vigor. In a passive voice, the subject of the sentence names the receiver of the action. So the cardboard box was attacked vigorously by the kitten. Hints that you're using passive voice include it feeling less direct, clunkier, longer, and sometimes just fluffy, which we don't want in research writing. You want to write formally, so of course it should go without saying that you should avoid colloquial expressions, slang, or jargon. And for proper tenses, you should tend to this, and the methods and the results are written in the past tense because in the methods you did it already, and in the results you found it already. The introduction and the present study or hypotheses are typically in past tense too, because other people have found these things already that you're discussing in your introduction, and you've formatted your research question and your hypothesis already. And then in your discussion, your conclusions that you're drawing about your results are typically in present tense, and your future directions are in future tense because you're recommending they happen in the future. I won't be incredibly strict when marking about things like this, but it's just good practice to get into, and it'll make you a stronger writer down the road. And lastly, I'll briefly talk about quotations. In my experience, students love direct quotes, but APA formatting does not love them. One of the most common reasons I took marks off when marking 102 essays last fall is for using too many quotations. So if you're just quoting directly from an article or textbook, I have no idea if you're actually able to explain the concepts in your own words. And that's just one of the reasons why they're discouraged. So if you're tempted to use a quote, always consider if you can express the concept in your own words, and then use an in-text citation afterwards instead. 9 times out of 10 or more, I promise you, you will be able to express it in your own words. I've found that for the most part, when you really need them is when you're discussing a new term coined by someone else, often another researcher. So here you don't want to plagiarize, but you need to use the exact term to express that you're discussing the same concept. So this is considered a quote and would need quotation marks and a page number. Like you can see the example there that I pulled from a previous slide. They measured what they termed to be participants' self-referential tendency, and that is a quote from them or from another paper. So you do need the quotation marks, you need the page number, but it's only a phrase. It's just a couple words. You're not quoting a whole concept that someone else has discussed in their words. So whenever you do need to use quotes, if you absolutely have to, you will provide a page number and enclose the quote in double quotation marks. Quotes shorter than 40 words are placed directly in the text, not put in a new paragraph. And there is another practice for quotes longer than 40 words, but I don't want to see any longer quotes than 40 words because that starts to be a substantial portion of your paper. So any quotes that you'll need to be using, if you really do need them, would be contained within the paragraph that you're discussing them. You don't need to start a new one or anything like that. Okay, and that's all for APA formatting. Thank you for listening. And this ends the second tutorial video of week 3 of PSYC 201W.